Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Candlepower Hour, Keys to the City. Tonight, we're diving deep into the soul of the underground music known to the world as goth, industrial, metal, and rock music. You've heard of The Mission UK, Bauhaus, Revolting Cox, Ministry, and Gary Numan. Those acts are the tip of the cold iceberg when it comes to our guest list of contributions to the 80s, 90s, and 2000s music scene. Alanis Morissette, AJ Jourgensen, Roger Daltrey, Peter Murphy, and producer, songwriter Mark Gemini Thwaite is here with us today to talk about his past, present, and new band. We have a ton of questions for Mark, so put your black clothing on and step out of your grave. This one's going to rock. Let's get started. Welcome, Mark.
How you doing?
Hey, welcome. How you doing, Mark? Welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks.
It's an honor to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, definitely.
Well, now, we do have a lot of questions to begin with. You are somebody who comes from the industrial world of rock and roll and heavy metal, the Gothic world, goth music. A lot of people probably have a lot of questions about that. So let's definitely get started. You are from Birmingham, England.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was born in Birmingham way back when. In fact, the same hospital that Ozzy Osbourne was born in, which I found out recently. So I guess
That's pretty odd.
Yeah. So I guess that hospital must have been there an awful long time because he's definitely older than me.
Well, what was Birmingham like when you were growing up? And Birmingham is where Ozzy comes from, where Black Sabbath comes from.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in that industrial, city? And what was music like when you were a young kid? What inspired you to get into music and rock and roll?
Well, I mean, Birmingham it's always been known as like an industrial city dating back, 100, 200 years. Kind of like the Detroit of the UK, I guess you could refer to it as. And it was pretty grimy and not really a particularly cool place to grow up when I was a kid. Luckily for me, my family moved to a city called Lichfield, only like 15 miles north of Birmingham, but in like leafy countryside, and it was a little cathedral city. So I got to go to school in Lichfield, which was a really nice, cool experience. But I was only 15 miles from Birmingham, so once I was a teenager, I started going back into Birmingham to check out bands. I remember going to see a lot of metal bands. Now, Birmingham's famous for being like the home of British heavy metal. You got Sabbath that came from there, Judas Priest came from there, half of Led Zeppelin came from there, Napalm Death. There's a long list of metal bands that come from the Birmingham area. So hard rock was kind of something you just heard a lot of. And if you go into pubs and what are we playing, and the jukeboxes would be bands like Sweet and Sabbath and T-Rex. And I remember hearing a lot of Deep Purple, and then as I became a teenager, like bands like Motorhead really blew up big in the UK in the late 70s, punk rock. So I was listening to a lot of punk rock when I was a teenager, like Sex Pistols, stuff like that.
What were some of the names of the nightclubs that you used to go to in Birmingham to see these bands? Like, what were the big rock clubs there?
Yeah, there's like notorious ones like the Rum Runner, which is where Duran Duran used to hang out. It was like a big sort of gothic and new romantic hangout in the 80s. And I also used to go to a place called the Costermonger, which was a famous hard rock bar in Birmingham. And I'd go to Edwards Number 8, which would have a metal night every Saturday. And there was quite a few clubs that kind of came and went,
What about Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, the original, the big heavy bands? Where did they play out of? How did they start when they were in the club scene? What was it all about for them? Do you know?
I mean, that's before my time. I was just a young boy when they were Black.
Yeah, I'm not trying to age you. I'm not. I apologize. But I just thought you might have a little bit more insight than us heavy metalers from LA.
They'd play a lot of the pubs and the venues in the Birmingham area. Think about Sabbath and also Priest, but definitely Sabbath came out of the blues scene. So there's a lot of blues bands that were playing in the 60s. And I remember reading not that long ago that the first time Black Sabbath played the song Black Sabbath, and it was apparently before they were called Black Sabbath. They used to be called Earth. And
Right.
the first time they played the song Black Sabbath when they performed as Earth was in Lichfield at a blues club in Lichfield, which is long gone. Although I think they actually relaunched it a few years ago, but it was long gone when I was going to school there. So yeah, they actually, historic metal was kind of debuting in this town that I grew up in the Midlands.
So when you were coming up with the type of music that you wanted to create as a blossoming musician, who was inspiring you at that time?
I mean, yeah, I started playing guitar when I was 15. So this was like around 1980. And what I'd been listening to was a lot of new wave and a lot of punk as a teenager in the late 70s. Because, bands like the Sex Pistols and Generation X and the Ruts and the Damned and that, they were like on mainstream radio in the UK, which was great. So it really permeated what I was listening to as a teenager. But also new wave of British heavy metal blew up. So bands like Iron Maiden and Angel Witch and Def Leppard were all like new wave of British heavy metal. And I was listening to stuff like the Scorpions and Van Halen. All guitar players were listening to Eddie Van Halen. And so this was all kind of a mix of punk and metal that I was listening to as a teenager. So that's like early influences for me.
And what was your home life? Was your family supportive of the fact that you were getting into, like the punk life and everything?
Right. I mean, I wasn't a punk. Even though I listened to punk, I grew my hair out. As a 15-year-old boy, I sort of grew all my hair long, and I looked like I played in Black Sabbath or one of those bands. But I was listening to punk because at that age, I was just like a sponge. To me, it was all guitar rock, And my mum and dad had divorced when I was young. They divorced when I was like 7 years old. So I was living with my mom as a solo parent. And she was definitely, she used to listen to a lot of music when I grew up. One of her jobs was to, when you get jukeboxes in British pubs, one of her jobs was to change the 45s, the vinyl 45s, on those jukeboxes, and she would bring a bunch of the old ones that she'd taken out. She'd bring them home. I don't know if she was supposed to, but I think they were like, yeah, if you want to keep them, you can keep them, because they were worn. They'd been played a bunch on jukeboxes. And so she'd come home with all these 45s, and I'd go through them and be listening to The Sweet and T-Rex and, Black Sabbath and all these 45s that were on these jukeboxes. And so I kind of grew up in a household where music was encouraged. My mom would always be blasting. She loved hard rock, and she'd be blasting Queen and stuff like that. And so she was encouraging of me not only playing guitar and pursuing that, but she also would come to the shows when I had my local bands. She'd come along and show her support. So yeah, I think my mom was, I think if my dad had been around, he was much more academic. He'd gone to university for engineering, get an engineering degree, got a master's, and he wanted me to, have a normal life with a job and a career. But he'd actually, by the time I was a teenager, my father was living in Toronto, Canada. He'd emigrated over there. So that distance allowed me to kind of, pursue my rock and roll dreams as a teenager. My mom was like supportive of it, which was great. I think that had a lot to do with the way I kind of developed as a musician.
That's pretty amazing. And as far as the 45s go, I had a 45 collection, 7-inch, and all of my favorite songs as a child all came from 45s before I got into the LPs, including Sweet. I had Fox on the Run. I was a big fan of Sweet. I got it all from this little store we had, Music Mecca, where we would go and buy all of our 45s at. So that's pretty amazing. Also, that your mom was a crazy rock and roller, and your dad was more academic. That's pretty awesome.
She's still like, she's turning 80 next year. She's still, I'll visit, when I'm on tour in the UK, and she'll still blast like Queen, on
that is so hot. Have you taken her? Have you taken her to any shows lately? Does she still, you drag her out to any concerts? Does she still like to go to shows?
Well, she will come and watch me perform,
to see you guys.
Yeah, like I was touring last year. Well, actually earlier this year with a band called The Wonder Stuff, who are a British alternative rock band. And yeah, she comes along to some of the Wonder Stuff shows. You know, I mean, she's finding it more. She doesn't mind the loudness, but she's finding it. You know, she's getting older. She's got arthritis, so she finds it physically demanding to go to the shows and stand for long periods.
Right.
But she has no problem with
Right.
the rock and roll. She usually moans that I don't do enough guitar solos. So that's she's funny.
That is awesome. I do have a question. I want to jump back a little bit before we go forward, because we were talking about Birmingham and Black Sabbath and you know, Judas Priest and all those heavy metal bands. Black Sabbath playing Black Sabbath at a blues club.
Yeah.
So I'm getting to Gothic music and sort of the industrial world and the deep, the black clothing, the depressing. How did that come about, and how much of an inspiration was heavy metal to the forming of goth music and the, you know, the slower, deeper genre? How did that come about, in your opinion?
I mean, I was like I said, around 1980, I was listening to a lot of punk rock and metal, but some punk bands, most notably, you say Susie and the Banshees. Yeah, they started off as like punk stroke new wave, and then they quickly kind of morphed into more of a sort of a gothic sound musically. I mean, Susie always sang the way she sang, but it sort of got darker and darker pretty quickly. And yeah, these are the forefathers of that gothic rock sound. Not discounting, of course, Velvet Underground, who you could argue were kind of touching on goth with Venus in Furs and stuff like that way back. But yeah, bands like Susie that kind of went dark, and Joy Division came out around 79, and they sounded dark. And and the Damned started flirting with certain sort of darker textures in their music. And so I started being exposed to that because I was listening to these bands when they were punk and new wave, and they follow what they're doing. Nobody was calling it goth. It was just a darker attitude. I've never really thought about if a band like Sabbath had an influence over like some of those old goth bands. I doubt if Sabbath had an influence, say, on Joy Division or Susie and the Banshees.
Right.
However, the imagery of Black Sabbath probably did play a part, because they were rocking the black and the crosses and the whole, you know, the whole sort of dark wave vibe way back then, you know. And so in a sense that certainly from an aesthetic, and you know, a song like Black Sabbath and stuff like that, yeah, it's definitely, I guess it's echoing the kind of a vibe of a gothic rock band. You know, when you think about Typo Negatives, they would definitely have been inspired by Sabbath and also some of the gothic bands like Sisters of Mercy and stuff like that, and they've kind of blended it together.
Well, you would think so.
The very first band that you formed was with Steve Danger. How did that go about?
Sorry, say that again?
The very first band that you formed was with Steve Danger. How did that come about?
Yeah, so that was a metal band we formed at school, and Steve Danger, for those that don't know, he's a drummer from a British metal band Wolfsbane. A lot of Americans may not be aware of Wolfsbane, but their most notable claim to fame, they were from Tamworth, England. Tamworth was like 6 miles away from where I was going to school in Lichfield, in the Midlands, basically. And then, but their claim to fame was their singer, Blaze Bayley, went on to replace Bruce Dickinson in Iron Maiden. So any Maiden fan will know who Wolfsbane are, because, you know, it was one of their singers, their only singer that ended up replacing Bruce. So, but prior to that, yeah, my first band at school was with Steve Danger on drums. His name's Steve Ellett. And yeah, that was quite an experience. And we had a metal band. I think we were called Trans Am, I believe.
Trans Am.
Yeah. You know, the Americans.
The last comment I do want to make about the goth and getting back to the Black Sabbath and how, you know, they might have influenced, maybe not. But what I was going to say is that, like, when you open up Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, to the double album, and you see that dead woman in a coffin, if that doesn't represent goth music, I don't know what does.
Yeah,
you know. So it's weird. It's definitely. I think maybe it also had something to do with the history of Europe, and how intense the history goes back to the Middle Ages and
Well, I mean,
the depressing
I
era.
had
I don't know, but
I had
I
like
think it's
a music teacher, Diego, back in like college, who was like, "Oh, Goth was really inspired by Bach,
Right. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
classical music, so it does go far
interesting.
back. It is inspired by all of that."
Well, let's get to talking about you, Mark, and all of the bands that you've been a part of. You come from the Mission UK.
Yeah.
You've been a member of that band for so long. You're a pivotal part of that, a pillar of the band. What was it like being a part of that and forming and getting to be a, that genre? What was it like?
Well, I wasn't an original member of the Mission. They formed in the mid '80s. They were formed from the ashes of the Sisters of Mercy. Well, I say the ashes. That basically Wayne Hussey, the guitarist from the Sisters of Mercy, and Craig Adams, the bassist from the Sisters of Mercy, they left the Sisters and formed the Mission. And Wayne decided to be the singer of the Mission. So, in a sense, that just left Andrew Eldritch from the Sisters. So you had more original Sisters of Mercy members actually in the Mission than you did in the Sisters of Mercy. But the Sisters of Mercy carried on with different musicians. The Mission formed in the mid '80s, did 2 or 3 albums, I think 3 albums, and then their guitarist Simon Hinkler left in 1990. They kind of released another album as a 3-piece, and then they got me in on guitar in '92. So I joined them in '92. And went on to record on four of the studio albums throughout the '90s and into the mid 2000s, and then we actually split up. Wayne called it a day on the band. I think around 2008 we did a farewell tour, and then they actually reformed in 2010 or 2011 with the original guitarist, and so they've been going as the original lineup. So I kind of played a part in the sort of 1990s and the 2000s, and
Right.
Yeah.
You've been a part of an amazing array of bands and artists that you work with. Your career has sort of just always been, a part of this project, releasing a single with this project. You've done work with Bauhaus. You've done work with Gary Numan, Al Jourgensen, the Revolting Cox. We do have questions. What was it? How is it? It's such a different world to be a part of. From it's definitely not the metal world as I know it.
Right. Yeah. I guess I just kind of, I moved from the Birmingham area to London in the late '80s. I met a girl actually, and I started dating her, and she lived in London, and so I ended up moving in with her in London. And as soon as I kind of moved to London, the bright lights and the streets paved with gold, it's the way we see London. I started making some connections pretty quickly, and I joined. I responded to an ad for a band advertising for a guitarist, and a name band. I was like, oh, I wonder who that is, and it ended up being like Dave Roberts, who was in a band, Sex Gang Children, who are another sort of notable Gothic rock band from the '80s, and he's forming this new band, offshoot band called The Children. So I joined that, and then that led to me joining Spear of Destiny, who weren't considered a Gothic rock band, but I think having those 2 bands on my resume meant that when I got offered the gig with the Mission, I kind of had a decent resume. But then once I joined the Mission, I guess it just, even though I was kind of a punk and metal guy as a teenager, it led me on that sort of dark wave path with the Mission UK. And I was in them for like on and off for about 15 years. And then after that, I did do a stint with Tricky, who's a trip hop artist. So I tried to sort of break the mold, and I was touring with him and did a few albums with Tricky.
Actually, my favorite song from him is Armies.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't play on that one, but yeah, great song. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so
that's
Tricky
really
was
cool.
a lot of fun, and I got to experiment musically with him. But then I heard Peter Murphy needed a guitarist for a US tour, Peter Murphy being the singer of Bauhaus, and I got that gig in 2005. So again, I was sort of back on the trajectory of like the Gothic rock arena. And it's kind of gone on like that. But I've tried to, experiment with different stuff, like working with Al Jourgensen and Ministry, which is more of kind of industrial and metal, getting back to the sort of the noisy guitars. And more recently, I've been working with Napalm Death, two of the guys from Napalm Death, and, they're extreme metal, thrash and hardcore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I try and mix it up,
So apparently you performed on the David Letterman show and Late Night with Conan O'Brien. So what was that like?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was with Tricky. We were promoting his Blowback album, 2001. So yeah, that was awesome. We did Chris Rock's show as well. Chris Rock used to have a TV show, and that was fun. So yeah, I got to do all these mainstream TV shows, and quite an experience, a bit of a whirlwind. My favorite was Conan. Conan's just a great guy. He was definitely the most friendly of them all. And I guess because he plays guitar himself, he came up and shook my hand and stuff like that. And that was very cool.
Is it different when you're setting up to go on one of these shows versus when you do like other performances?
It was performing live. I mean, it's nerve-wracking because you're performing live, but you know that you're actually performing live to, millions of people on cable TV, I mean, there's obviously a delay, but so I guess they have chance to edit stuff, but you're supposed to perform it live and not stop and not have any fuck-ups. When we did the Conan O'Brien show, I was playing away and my guitar strap came off. I had strap locks, which locked the strap in place, but I guess one of the screws had come undone. And halfway through the song, my guitar suddenly, goes down, and I'm like holding it with one hand, and the tech runs on stage and like reattaches the guitar strap. And with some clever multi-camera editing, you didn't even know. I was like super embarrassed, and I finished the song thinking, "Wow, this probably looks really amateur," on the TV. And then when I got to see a playback of it, somebody had video recorded it. They'd managed to completely edit that out in the control room because they had all the different angles, so it just didn't matter. Really.
Oh, that's awesome!
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, they're the magic of television.
Yeah,
now,
they got you. Yeah, they were good.
when you play on television shows, do you bring your own lineup? Does the band bring their own backline, or is it supplied?
Sometimes you bring your own backline, and sometimes it's supplied. It all depends on the trajectory of the band. I'll clarify that. So when we did Conan and we did Letterman, I believe we were on tour. So I seem to recall us using our own backline. We just scheduled the performances in. But sometimes if you get like a last minute performance on a TV show, like we had to do a TV show in the UK called Jules Holland, I remember that being all rental backline because it was like a one-off.
Right.
So it kind of depends. If your gear's around, if you happen to be on tour and all your gear's together and your gears and the band are all in New York and that's where the TV show is, then great. You get to do it with your own gear. But we do a lot of festival dates where we use rental backlines, so it's not that unusual. You just ask for the same model of amps that you normally use,
Sure. Right. I want to ask you a couple questions about cover tunes and recording, songs that have been written by other folks. You've done some great cover tunes in your career. You even did an amazing cover tune of an ABBA song,
right?
With him,
H-I-M. With the singer from him, the legendary Ville Valo. So, how did you meet, and how did you end up working on that together?
Well, when I was in the mission and we were doing like European festivals in the UK in the 90s. This would have been later on, like in the late 90s, we were doing some festivals. And this band, Him, who I'd never heard of at the time, H-I-M, they're on the bill on some of these like European and German festivals and Belgium and stuff. And I remember doing a show. I remember we actually went on before them. And I was like, well, that's crazy. They must be one of these new bands that's blown up really big. And I remember when we did our set, I looked over and Ville, the singer, was like watching our set from the side of the stage. And after the show, he sort of as I walked off, he was like, "Oh, that was really great," and we sort of struck up a conversation. So this was in the late '90s, and we sort of became friends. And and then we did another festival together with the Mission and him later that year, and so we started crossing paths. I was in New York on tour with Peter Murphy in 2005, and Ville was in town mixing a him album, so he came along to our show. And again in LA, when they were passing through LA, we'd hang out. So we've hung out a lot on and off over the years. So when I was doing a solo album, the ABBA cover was on my first solo album called Volumes, and I was thinking about, I want my friends to. I was like, I'm going to do a solo album as a guitarist, but I'm not a singer. I don't like my voice. I'm like the Jimmy Page of the bands. I mean, kind of write a lot of the music and do a lot of production, but I'm not interested in singing just like Jimmy Page isn't. So I asked a bunch of my friends who I'd worked with or would like to work with, would they sing on the album? And with the ABBA cover, I sent it to Ville, who was in Helsinki. That's where he lives, and he loved it, and he put down this great vocal, and we shot a video for it, and it did really well. Really pleased with it.
Knowing Me, Knowing You by ABBA. It's amazing. Seriously.
Yeah.
I think Razor Blade Romance by him is a phenomenal masterpiece album of just heavy goth. I think it's phenomenal.
It's a great album.
That's great that you have a relationship with that, that you can have these artists come in. You've done work with Bauhaus. You've done work with Peter Murphy. What was it like recording and working with him?
Well, I haven't worked with Bauhaus technically. What I've done is I've toured with Peter Murphy and David J. So half of Bauhaus, we did a tour performing, Bauhaus classics, but it wasn't billed as Bauhaus. It was billed as Peter Murphy featuring David J.
Okay.
So I don't like to say that I've worked with.
You were in Bauhaus.
Worked with members of Bauhaus, and I've played Bauhaus stuff. But just fantastic.
Correction.
I loved listening to Bauhaus as a teenager. I was a big fan. I loved the way they flirted with like glam and punk and dub, elements of dub and reggae. They kind of mixed it all together. So get to play, and Daniel Ash, the guitarist from Bauhaus, one of my favorite guitar players. I'm a real fan of his. So to get to play and pay homage to him and try and make it sound good.
So this was an example of it's not terrible to meet your heroes, right? Because you met yours and you actually had a long-standing career with them.
I've been lucky in a lot of my heroes that I've met turned out to be great people, so I've been very blessed like that, definitely.
You've done work with DMX.
Posthumously, like there was a song that
posthumously. Okay, explain that. How?
Well, what it was that I worked on some music that DMX sang on, but it wasn't released until after his death. So it was posthumously released. As like a previously unreleased version. Of a track. So that was.
What's your opinion? Keep going. I'm sorry.
That was cool.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That was cool because I like to branch out into different genres, and obviously there was a flirtation with hip hop and that whole scene when I worked with Tricky. So to work with DMX in that capacity was fantastic.
Right. Well, Tricky being trip hop is a genre a lot of people, in the rock and roll world maybe never even heard of, but
right.
I actually love trip hop. One of my favorite bands is Hooverphonics. I consider trip hop staring out the window of a tour bus music. I don't know why. It's just it's just kind of a mesmerizing genre of music. And the fact that you've been a part of Tricky is also really cool. What is your opinion on hip hop?
I mean, hip hop was hip hop stuff that I sort of was listening to because you couldn't escape it back in the 80s. Would been Public Enemy and NWA and all of those classics, and the Beastie Boys I loved, no doubt, because they were white boys and splicing, hard rock with like hip hop beats and raps, and so I was a big fan of the Beastie Boys. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic genre, and I like trip hop because it kind of takes the elements and the sort of vocal delivery, but slows it down and makes it more introspective, and the beats become more introspective and, dare I say, sexier. Like you'll hear a lot of trip hop in strip clubs, and in sexy scenes in movies and stuff like that. It's just more intimate sounding, and it's just and there's more of an atmosphere to it, Like bands like Portishead were fantastic. You almost hear, like, you can hear elements of Portishead that wouldn't sound out of place in a Gothic rock club, for example. Certain songs.
Right.
So it all kind of blends together sometimes.
You also, I noticed that you have had experiences working with Roger Daltrey, the great Roger Daltrey.
Yeah, an early session.
How did that transpose?
A friend of mine, Martin Christie, he was friends with a guy called Justin de Villeneuve. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I just moved to London, and I became friends with Martin, and he was friends with Justin de Villeneuve, who used to be Twiggy. Remember the model Twiggy from the 60s? He used to be Twiggy's manager, and for some reason, Martin was approached. I guess Justin said, I'm doing this thing for the BBC Radio in England, where it's going to be kind of like a musical based on my life, and I want you to write the music. So Martin came up with the music, and because I was Martin's friend, I was invited along to record guitars on it. And as luck would have it, Roger Daltrey was also a friend of Justin's, and was signed on to play the role of Justin de Villeneuve in this. It was like a radio musical stage play, if you can imagine that. So I got to play guitars on this stuff with Roger, and that was a fantastic early experience for me because he's such a legend,
Yeah,
it's great.
When you're associating with these folks who I consider absolutely legendary, have you ever been intimidated or in working with folks, or have you ever, just like walked in nervous and fucked up on a performance or anything like that?
I guess, I definitely get nervous, particularly if I'm working with musicians that I greatly admire and I don't know them, So, like Roger Daltrey, I didn't know him, and who am I to him? I'm just some no-name guitar player from Birmingham, England. So that was pretty nerve-wracking. But I guess I find it within myself to just kind of bring... Yeah, you kind of want to show off a bit, especially when I was younger. I'd want to show off and show this Roger Daltrey guy how good I am, So there's that young ambition that came into play. And sometimes that's what you want to do, is if you're intimidated, just kind of reach into yourself, and you just want to try and you want to impress that person with your musicality and your ability,
Right. Yeah. It's you sort of go into Roger Daltrey's world with Pete Townsend in the back of your head, maybe just like, all right, how am I gonna prove myself when Pete's been his guitar player for so long?
Yeah.
I think that's great. You ended up in Toronto, Canada.
I did, yeah. Because I mentioned.
Is that where you?
I mentioned before.
Is that where you?
Sorry, go ahead.
Your father was in Toronto.
Yeah. So my dad moved to Toronto. He got like a job in the automotive industry, like as an engineer, for, I think it was Dunlop. And then he ended up working for Ford Motor Company. But so to cut a long story short, yeah, he moved to Toronto when I was 12, and I'd start to visit him, like summer holidays off from school. I would go and spend like a month in Toronto. And actually, I should backpedal. He started off in Buffalo, New York. So he started working in Buffalo, and then he met a Canadian, and the next thing I knew, he'd married my stepmother, and they moved to Toronto. And so I started developing this love affair with North America because I was going there as an impressionable young teenager, and then Toronto as well, which was a great town. And
it kind of sounds like you didn't have any issues adapting to like the road life because you were already doing that.
Yeah, I guess I did quite a bit of traveling. Yeah, I guess you're right. When I was younger, and when I was 20, when I was 20, I think my dad was encouraging me to like move to Toronto. He thought it would be a good move for me, and I kind of found it very glamorous, and I liked some of the bands coming out of Toronto, like Rush and Skinny Puppy and stuff like that. So I ended up I moved to Toronto in '85, and I was living there for a little while, and I played in a Canadian band called National Velvet, who were a Gothic rock band, and they ended up doing quite well. They signed a deal and put out a couple of albums. I didn't last that long in Toronto. I kind of got homesick, and I realized that. So I worked in a record store there called Cheapies. So I was hearing all the stuff that people were coming in and asking for was like British bands, from the Gothic rock and the sort of 80s scene, everything from the Smiths, Duran Duran and Sisters of Mercy and you name it, the Cults, all the British rock bands. And I realized that I'd probably be better off as a musician if I was back in England, because this is what they're all listening to, English bands. It just seemed really cool to them. And I was like, I realize I'm probably in the wrong country. And I went back to live in England. And that was probably a good idea, because that's when I moved to London and ended up joining the Mission and so on and so forth. So that was a good move.
I see.
It worked out.
Okay.
I love Toronto, and it's a great city.
Well, Toronto has they had a really good music scene for a while.
Yeah.
My band actually played at the Silver Dollar Saloon on Spadina way back when.
Right.
And we blew the house down. It was fun.
Right.
But yeah, Toronto rocks.
It does. Yeah.
But I think you made the wise decision to go back to London, and I guess your career really blew up from there.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if I would have had the same connections and success if I'd stayed in Toronto. Possibly not.
Nope.
Unless I'd sidestepped and moved into the States and joined an American band.
Yeah.
It,
Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, everything in your life was like perfectly orchestrated and smooth. Like every decision was right, apparently, at least.
Well, I didn't realize it at the time, I do remember that I was dating the girl that I was dating, and bear in mind I was a young, tail end of my teenage years, and the girl I was dating, I kind of missed her when I went to live in Toronto, and so another reason I wanted to move back was to kind of hang out with her, and she was
love struck.
She was dating somebody else. By the time I got back, I found, cause I didn't know this. It's before cell phones and it's before email.
Well, you know what? That feeling led you towards a career, so it was still like it happened for a reason, and you have that calling and that pull, even if it appeared like it was for a different reason at the time.
Yeah. Like you said, everything happens for a reason. Even the heartbreak.
Yeah, like you followed your heart, and your heart led you to your career. I mean, it may not have been that specifically, but it led you towards your career. And I know you recently got married. If you want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah. You got married to the lovely Ashley, who you know, Ashley Bad, and a fixture on the LA Gothic scene. She DJs a lot of the events. Vampire Ball and the Vampire Salons and Bar Sinister and all that stuff.
You have a single out obsession with Ashley. It's an amazing rendition.
Yeah. I've got a bit of as you've noticed, I've got a bit of a penchant for doing cover versions, and I got a new band called Sevendials, and
we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and so I decided that, hey, let's do a cover of Obsession, the Animotion hit, because we kind of want to flesh out the album with a couple of extra tracks, and doing a cover is the quick way of doing that. And I'd actually created a remix for Ashley for her DJ sets of Obsession, where I'd kind of broken down the original mix into stems, and I'd added all new beats, and I'd added a bunch of guitars, and I'd fleshed it out and changed the arrangement and added some synths. And Ashley had been spinning it on some of her DJ sets. And so when it came time to add an extra song to the Sevendials album, I was like, oh, well, why don't I, just work? I've already done an arrangement of this remix. So I just took off the original vocal. I took out the original keyboard elements and guitar elements, which weren't really in my mix anyway. I'd kind of gotten rid of them. And I just had a brand new version to work with. And then I sent it to our singer, Chris Connolly. He's the guy that's worked with Revolting Cops and Ministry and bands like that. And I was like, oh, for the girl parts, I didn't really give much thought. I was like, oh, I should ask Ashley to do it, because Ashley's released a few solo records herself on Cleopatra Records over the last few years. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's see if Ashley enjoys singing on it. And it came out great. So that was a real happy happenstance that was like totally happened organically,
Nice.
Yeah.
Sevendials.
Yeah.
It's a great band. Let's talk about that. You have a new band. You have some amazing co-members in this. What are you up to? And let's talk about Sevendials.
Yeah, so new band. I'd been writing for a few years with both of these guys. As I mentioned, Chris Connolly, the vocalist, and also Paul Ferguson, the drummer, most notable from Killing Joke. He's their iconic drummer. Found a
Amazing.
Member. Yeah, found a member. I'd known Paul for quite a long time, longer than Chris. And Paul and I had collaborated together on some of Paul's material around 10 years ago, which led to us kind of working on his 2 solo albums that Paul Ferguson put out. And so I already had a relationship with Paul. And when I released my second MGT solo album called Gemini Night, I got Paul to do the drums on it. It was kind of like a return favor, because I'd helped him with his solo album. And so I got him to add drums to my album. And then at the same time as that, I was starting to work with Chris Connolly, because we were both working with an industrial collective called Primitive Race. Primitive Race put out a few albums. And so I was working with Chris on one thing and working with Paul on another thing. Chris and I started writing some stuff together. And so it seemed very organic to say to Paul, hey, come and add your drums to this. And that's how Sevendials was born.
How did you come up with the name Sevendials?
I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah. So Sevendials is an area of London, in Soho, in the central London. And, often the case when bands are trying to figure out a name, you just end up suggesting names, So I'd suggest 5 or 10 names, and Chris Connolly would suggest 5 or 10 names, and Paul Ferguson would. One of Paul's suggestions was Sevendials, and this was because he said he used to live in the Sevendials area when he was younger, and he thought it would be a cool name. And we all were like, yeah, that's a great name. And we decided to stick it together to make it one word. Because Sevendials is, because it's an actual area, it's a bit like saying Burbank or Beverly Hills, So there's all these government websites and presence that use the name Sevendials with a space. So I was like, all right, let's kind of stick it together, make it one word, and we'll capitalize it. And the thing about Sevendials is now it's a very gentrified and very hipstery place to go and grab a coffee or lunch or whatever in central London. But 200 years ago, Sevendials was one of the most dangerous areas of London. You basically wouldn't want to go in Sevendials after dark. You'd probably get
like Jack Ripper status.
Yeah, it was a real sketchy part of London. So we kind of like that idea. A, it sounds like a cool name, and B, it's got this historical reference of being a pretty dark place back in time,
Except for the new kids who are like, oh, we can go and get a coffee at Sevendials.
Yeah, now it's really.
Now it's like Silver Lake or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the horror has been gentrified.
Yeah.
That's now what are you involved with now with Sevendials? Are you planning on any traveling, any tours? You just released your album, so what's on the agenda?
Yeah, we're looking at trying to book some shows later in the year. I know Paul is going to be busy. He's going on tour with Ministry. He's going to be touring with Ministry and his band Light of Eternity. I've got some shows with Peter Murphy in the UK and mainland Europe in the summer. So yeah, we're looking at we're trying to get some Sevendials shows together for later in the year. It's kind of awkward because I live in Los Angeles, Chris lives in the Chicago area, Paul lives in the like Baltimore East Coast area. We're all British, but we all happen to live in America, and we're so far apart from each other that getting together for any show is going to be flights and hotels and accommodation and
Right.
rehearsal rooms, and it's going to cost a fair amount. So we're trying to see if we can,
Sure.
if we can get some decent festival slots.
The recording process of the album, when you tracked it, was it together in a studio, or was it did you involve bouncing tracks across country, and what was your process like?
Yeah, I would invariably like demo the original ideas. So I'd sort of do some drum programming and have a vision for verse, chorus, middle eights. I kind of put down the bass guitars, and I'd put down obviously the electric guitars. I'd add the synthesizers. Then I would send it to Chris, and he would work on it in his home studio in Chicago, record his sketch vocals, send those back to me. I'd be like, yeah, this is great. Okay, let's give it to Paul. And then Paul would then add his drums. So I'd remove he'd have like my drums as like a guideline, but I'd be like, just bring what you want to bring to it. And he would add his own feel, because my drums are like programmed, like, drum machine, basically. His was him actually playing. And then he would send me his stems of his drum parts, and I'd mix them in, and I'd end up re-recording a few bits to kind of sit in better with his drums. And then Chris would refine his vocals some more, and then I'd do a mix. So it was kind of like
nice,
a lot of file sharing, but still, trying to keep it as organic as possible.
It sounds organic. It sounds very good. It's very, very professional and very, I like to say, analog sounding. So it's it's good. It's real nice. Now, when you are mixing and putting all this stuff together across sending files and back, the final mix, was that something that was all done by you on this album? Where did the mixing come from?
Yeah, I mixed it. I guess that's my.
You get all the tracks, bring them all home, and put them up on your console.
Yeah, going back to my Jimmy Page reference, like how Jimmy Page had always mixed the Led Zeppelin stuff, because I kind of composed a lot of the music, or I had the vision for the cover tunes as well, and how they would sound, and I felt like a natural guy to mix it, and the mixes came out great. It definitely saves us money as well, so we don't have to like pay somebody else to mix it. But yeah, I've mixed quite a few records. I've mixed quite a few records over the years, so I feel like I've got to a stage where certainly if it's my own material, I feel very comfortable mixing it. It's funny because a lot of people, because we put this record out on the Creation Youth label, which was formed by Alan McGee of Creation Records. They're the band that like discovered Oasis and were massive, and also Youth, who is the bass player from Killing Joke, but he's also very, very renowned producer. He's worked with Paul McCartney, you name it, And a lot of people were assuming that Youth actually mixed this album, and I've had to sort of go, no, actually it was me. So I feel like, okay, well, nice. If they feel it sounds good enough to be a Youth mix, then I guess that's high praise indeed,
Right, thanks for
the album is a crash course in catastrophe.
Yeah,
I love it.
Great.
How'd you get the name? What is it all about?
Oh, that's Chris's. Chris came up with the name. I couldn't tell you where he came up with that name from, but again, we were pooling band names, and the minute he suggested that, we all were like, "That's the one," Fantastic.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Now I have a question for you, because you have a solid a Schecter Guitars endorsement,
I do.
and you have your own guitar.
I do. Actually, I happen to have it right here.
There we go.
This bad boy. Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a Les Paul, sort of a custom Les Paul. This is beautiful.
Yeah.
What was your idea for this guitar?
I was chatting to Schecter CEO Michael Caravallo. I'd put Michael in touch with Wayne Hussey. Michael was a big Mission fan, and I put him in touch with Wayne Hussey, and he was saying to me that he'd love to do a signature model for Wayne. And so I kind of put them in touch with each other and helped facilitate that. And then Michael kindly offered to do a signature model for me. And so here it is. And they just started making these. This model's called the Solo 2. And as you can see, it's very reminiscent of a Les Paul standard. Les Paul custom with the block inlays. And Les Paul's like my favorite guitar. And so, I based my signature model on this Solo 2 shape, but it's all my choice of like a gunmetal. It's actually like a flip-flop paint where sometimes it's blue and sometimes it's purple.
That's beautiful.
And so I chose the paint.
I really love the color.
The red, the stained red back, and my choice of mother of pearl inlays. I got a Seymour Duncan pickups because I got an endorsement with those guys. I got a Jeff Beck bridge and a Alnico Pro 2 neck, and my choice of a Bigsby, which they don't often put on their Les Paul style models. And so it's got my initials on the.
That's nice. Is that one of your main axes now?
Yeah. I mean, I bounce between different guitars, but I like to play this wherever possible. Right. It's definitely one of my main guitars. I've just been touring with it.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a great. Schecter makes great guitars. I definitely gotta give a shout out to Schecter.
Yeah.
And the guitars that they have, they all come set up professionally out of the box.
Yeah.
When you go to Guitar Center, they don't set anything up. I'm surprised Guitar Center even sells guitars. Yes, I'm staring at you, Guitar Center. Set your guitars up. You might sell a few more. Yeah. So, now, as far as where you are today and where you're heading into the future, what is life like to you now with kids? Music. Where are kids? Where do they need to be? As far as inspiration, how are you going to advise these kids and younger people on getting into music, breaking into the music business? It's definitely changed. What's your take on the music business these days?
I feel like, giving young kids advice on it. I may not, even though I've obviously had a career in music, I feel as if what I've learned about my experience of breaking into music 30 years ago doesn't necessarily factor in now, because 30 years ago there was no internet, there was no streaming, there was no Spotify, there was no TikTok. And so, I feel like I might meet a kid, a 20-year-old kid now that might be more clued in as to how to break a song, by getting it placed on TikTok or getting it placed on a commercial. There's a different model now. So the stuff that I learned about making it big doesn't necessarily apply anymore. The only thing that I would say still possibly applies is you got to do the work. You can't just be like I'm a guitarist, right? So you could be the world's most amazing bedroom guitarist, but it does help to get out there and play some live shows. And so I still recommend that musicians and singers try and play as many shows as possible. So you developed the ability to actually entertain an audience, and get your music out there. But you see, there's so many artists now that actually write a demo on their keyboard in their room using their Mac Pro and band or whatever, that yeah, and they kind of blow up big and don't have to play any shows. So I feel like the rule book's kind of been ripped up and thrown out the window, really. All I would say is, I guess you've just got to believe in yourself and you got to persevere, and don't let rejection set you back.
I respect that answer, especially because coming from like the acting world, when I was studying it in college, all our professors taught us the traditional way and the way you're supposed to do things. But then it seems like after that, that's when like the climax of the internet and just TikTok videos and things kind of took over. And it's kind of like, okay, you can go that route and know certain things, but at the same time, it's not the same because you don't have to go that route anymore. Like there's other ways of accomplishing those
it's
goals
kind of
now.
weird. There's less rules than before, like anybody can release a record now. Before, back in my day, and Diego's day, you had to like record in a studio and blow money on that, and then shop it to record labels, and then sign a record deal, and then wait for that record label
and compete.
And then that record label would pay money to get you on this radio station and that radio station. There's this whole system. None of that matters anymore. Mercury, you could just write your own song on a keyboard at home without even having that much knowledge of how to do stuff, because a lot of it's all programmed now where it'll give you a beat and it'll give you a chord sequence, and and you can also
so you're saying I should use AI.
You can use AI, you can do all these things, and you could upload that track yourself without leaving your home to a distribution company, let's say DistroKid, who will then place it on Spotify. And so you can have a track up on Spotify, come up with some sleeve art, stick it on there, and you can be on Spotify alongside Michael Jackson and Van Halen and Tricky and everybody. And the only thing,
and have 1 billion streams.
The only thing that stops it, of course, is that without being noticed, you're sort of swimming with the fishes. A million fishes in the ocean. But it's just amazing that now you don't need to sign a record deal anymore. You don't need to. You don't have to press up CDs or vinyl if you don't want to. You can just do it all in house, and you can pay to get it uploaded. It's not that expensive, and your track can be on Spotify, and it can still blow up. People can start adding it to playlists on Spotify, and all of a sudden you might have it in your hands. It's crazy how it's kind of opened up for everybody in a way.
It has, but reading a couple months ago how the major labels, Atlantic Records, I was reading, signs mostly off of TikTok now.
Yeah.
Major labels go to TikTok for the content, for the streams, and that's how you're going to get signed. It's not about the live show at the Whiskey A Go-Go anymore.
No. And of course I have very little.
Now it's about the TikTok live.
I have very little interaction with TikTok. I think I created an account, but I posted a couple of funny videos on it. But I certainly have never thought about using it to promote my music. Maybe I should. And so I'm the last person.
You should hop on.
Yeah, but I feel like the kind of stuff that blows up on TikTok isn't like gothic rock, or hard rock. It's like
no, you'd be surprised.
Really?
You'd be surprised. I barely go on, but the other day I opened up TikTok, and then there was like this band, and it was this group of like African American kids that had like this really dark but like medieval sounding band.
Oh, okay.
Like it was like goth and like medieval.
Bazillion views.
Yeah.
No, it was trending, and I was like, oh wow, that sounds really cool and different, and I like what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not to be not, because in a way it's like TikTok it's operating like a radio, right? Like we had radio back in the day where, a song, you'd hear a song and go, oh, that's cool. And then other DJs would hear it or people would ask for it and off it goes. And TikTok's just kind of replaced radio, I guess, where it's the new medium where you're going to hear music,
Well, the TV replaced the radio, and then our phones replaced the TV, right?
Yeah. Everything evolves, It's just hard as you get older as a musician, as an artist, you find it more taxing to kind of keep track of everything,
Like to evolve with the current media.
Mark, This has been an amazing conversation. We've gotten a lot out of this, and we really appreciate you coming on this show. We know you got some really good stuff coming up with the band. We definitely want to follow Sevendials, and continue on. We definitely want to bring Ashley back, because we probably want to we do have some questions for her.
Yeah.
So I think we should definitely think about continuing this conversation. Get Ashley so we can talk further about what y'all are doing. And it's been a great chat. We're going to sign off on this. And again, to inspire the kids, if you can just real quick,
any last
just give us
words of advice for anybody who is seeking to become a musician or an artist.
My advice is, stick with it. Try and work with friends if you can. Like one sort of inspiration for me was when I got a guitar was that my best friend at the time, he'd gotten a guitar, shortly before me, and so I would go and jam with him. And he was always a bit better than me, and it kind of gave me somebody to bounce off and a carrot for me to chase and catch up to him. And then we formed a band together. And so I would say, I'd recommend it was very hard for a while, but what kept me going was keeping up with him. And I feel like, singers, musicians, whatever, just work with people. Don't just work in a bubble. In your own room, try and work with other people, and you'll find that it will bring you out and help you develop your style, whether you're a singer or as a guitarist or a musician, and just keep sticking at it and just believe in yourself and ultimately do it for yourself. Don't pander to genre styles, whatever's trendy this week. Just kind of try and trust your own instincts and be true to yourself. Because it actually shows in the music when an artist is actually being genuine and not kind of jump on a bandwagon, for example,
Well, Mark, you have definitely done your networking and have gotten out of your bedroom to create music with so many different friends that you've made over the years. I congratulate you. That's amazing. I want you to continue on with that, because you are inspiring, and you even inspire me, because I need to get out of my room and start playing live again. And with you telling me that I need to do that, I'm going to do that. So
I just need to get out of my room in general. So
thank you for coming on this show. We really appreciate it. It has been an honor to have you, and definitely come back and visit us. Let's plan for that.
Sounds like follow up. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. This is the Candlepower Hour. Please go to ElectraCast.com to listen to our podcast and other fantastic podcasts. We're on YouTube. I'm kind of losing my voice. Mercury is here with us. Bill Matoyer, Dan Moore. We're signing off on the Candlepower Hour. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all soon. Peace.
Peace.
Sit, Lulu, sit.
Powered by
ElectraCast.